never going back. We only go forward. Never again. You know, when we got the news of the hostages over the weekend,
that heart-wrenching cry came from Montreal Rabbi Ruben Pupko outside Concordia University's Student Center Tuesday night, as dozens of Jewish students joined members of the Montreal Jewish community for a vigil to honor the 6 executed Israeli hostages, whose bodies were discovered on the weekend in a Hamas tunnel under Rafah. Several pro-Israel student clubs at Concordia and McGill sponsored the vigil, along with Shar Shemayim Synagogue. They held it on the first day of classes of the new academic year. And that's important, because by doing so, it clearly sets a bit of a different tone and shows the students are better organized and are fighting back against anti-Semitism compared to how things started out after October 7th, when Hamas supporters and pro-Palestinian groups at the university gave out candies and openly celebrated the massacre of Israelis, and then began 10 months of targeting Jewish students and Jewish club activities. And they made life miserable for Jewish students at Concordia. And while some students even chose to skip classes and stay home because they felt in danger, they did also complain to the school's president several times. Then they sent him a strongly worded lawyer's letter. And although the president agreed to set up a task force to look into all sorts of racism on campus, not just anti-Semitism, he then appointed an anti-Israel Jewish student to sit on it. So that's why 4 Concordia students have now filed an actual lawsuit in Quebec's Superior Court. They filed it just a few days ago, and they're asking the court to order Concordia to protect them this year as they go back to school. And that means enforcing the school's existing codes of conduct, including banning face coverings on campus, and to kick out those pro-Palestinian protesters who break the rules.
Only common sense people know that the best approach to a problem is to stand tall, be heard, and use the legal system.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, September the 4th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News. The 4 Concordia students who launched the lawsuit are active in pro-Israel clubs, especially one called Startup Nation. Some of them even sat on the wider Concordia Student Council. Most were born in Israel. Because of their activism since October 7th, they've been regular targets for pro-Palestinian protesters who disrupted their events, took over a campus building, followed them to Jewish Federation headquarters on the other side of town, and blockaded them inside for hours. And the lawsuit lists 26 pages of incidents like that, social media posts, threats, punches, hate speech, all the students endured. Until now, the 4 had kept their names out of any legal fight for their own safety, but they've decided to stand up and reveal them in this court case, hoping to change the long-standing toxic culture for Jews on campus. Anastasia Zorchinsky, Michael Ishayek, Drew Silver, and Diana Levitin aren't giving interviews yet, but their lawyer Neil Oberman is, and he joins me now from Montreal. I'd like to know why they decide, or why you all decided that you needed to move from letters, demand letters, to actually going further.
Right. I just want to make sure for the record, I represent the physical students, and Michael Hollander represents Hillel Concordia as well as Startup Nation. So there's 2 separate attorneys in the record. As you know, that my demand letter initially sent migrated to the proceedings as alleged due to the inaction on the part of defendants and the failure of the defendants to enforce their own regulations and bylaws governing the Concordia University campus.
Right. This came out August 30th. School starts now.
We wanted to make sure that the lawsuit was filed prior to the commencement of the campus life in order to ensure that the students' rights were protected. The timeline of hate and aggression, which is contained at Section 3, subsection B of the 100-page document, details in the greatest of detail, and it is a hard read, quite frankly, all the events from October 7th, 2023, going up to the final event of, almost June of 2024 and thereafter, that were not properly handled as alleged in the proceedings by both the defendants, Mr. Graham Carr, as well as Concordia University.
The lawsuit said the students are at risk for their physical and mental safety, while Concordia tolerates and condones and encourages behavior by two campus groups and other bad actors. But they also said their lives are imperiled. How are their lives imperiled?
First, I want to take another step back and ask a fundamental rhetorical question. Why must students hire lawyers to attend this university in 2024? It is not a common practice for young students who are there to study to hire lawyers so that they can properly educate themselves in a institution such as Concordia's. I'm not going to get into the rendition why each of my plaintiff clients, the individual students, believe that they are in peril, that they're hurt by what's going on. I think the facts speak for themselves, and the students will be available at the appropriate time for an interview. But what I want to tell your listeners, your readers, is the following: this file had to be brought not because they wanted to bring lawsuits, is because the options were limited to none. A letter writing campaign was ignored. It forced the hands of the plaintiffs, the physical plaintiffs, to take action for themselves, their colleagues, and students who will eventually attend the University of Concordia. The reality is that on a daily basis, these students, as alleged in the proceedings, were the subject of harassment, intimidation, aggression, and violence, because that's well detailed in the November 8th, 2023 episode on campus in which Mr. Bara Ilya Abu Hamad, who is not a party to these proceedings, but is named as a leader of Montreal for Palestine, as well as groups on campus, was involved in a physical, violent altercation with one of the plaintiffs to the extent that his life was brought in peril, according to the allegations. Concordia University, as well as its staff, its mandataries, assigns, and agents, including Mr. Graham Carr, are responsible for the maintenance of peace and tranquility upon the campus grounds. At no time should any student, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, or other, be subjugated to such a behavior. It is this lawsuit that will bring to these students and all students justice, equality, and safety on campus.
Okay, there's a parallel, actually a previous one. Well, maybe parallel, I'll say the class action lawsuit. I'm sure you're aware. Our listeners will probably remember. I think it's by Diamond and Diamond against Concordia for $15 million for other universities. I think are also named in this. Where does yours fit in? Is yours quicker?
Fantastic question. I want to make a clear distinction. This proceeding before the court does not seek any monetary conclusions. It seeks injunctive relief as well as declaratory judgments. This is not the same as the proceedings sought by the class action lawsuit, which are primarily financial in nature, with one injunctive type relief for them to come up with some future policies. There is no possibility that there's any interplay between these two, save and except for some of the facts are the same. But beyond that, it's a completely standalone, not related, separate lawsuit.
Back to where yours fits in. Just like the I'm not calling it bubble injunction you got, but basically the safety zone injunction that you were successful at getting for Jewish synagogues and things in Montreal where protests couldn't be. Will it be the kind
Yeah,
of same thing that you got to act now because we can't wait till the merits of the case are long down the road being argued?
sure. Well, the proceedings are set up in a way that there's no provisional injunction sought. A provisional injunction is sought on an urgent basis. Right now, we're proceeding by way of interlocutory and permanent injunction. The goal is, as per the conclusions, is to seek that Concordia, because it is responsible for its campus, ensures that rooms, classrooms, public spaces on the campus are not blocked, impeded, so that our clients, the students, can benefit from them. It also seeks that any harassment, intimidation, stop. They have the power, Concordia. It's their campus, it's their buildings. They control who comes on their buildings. They control what people do in their buildings. They have a legal obligation to ensure people are safe when they come onto their campus. There is a sui generis contract between the plaintiffs and the university in order to ensure that when you spend your money, you get what you're entitled to get. There is no doubt, I have no ambiguity in our position. It is as clear as the day is long in the summer months in Alaska that what is going on in and on the campus of Concordia is wrong, wrong, and wrong.
How fast can this be
Sure.
heard?
So basically, at this juncture, they will respond within a period of 15 days. The parties will establish a case protocol on how the hearing will take place, what steps will be done in order to get to a hearing. Normally, a protocol should not last more than 180 days. It might be earlier, it might be later. We believe strongly that the campus should be protected ongoing during these proceedings. It's incumbent on Concordia. If for whatever reason the facts militate in favor of emergency hearings, such as provisional injunctions, safeguard orders, or the like, we will examine all possibilities. Our clients have put their names out there. They're brave, they're strong, they're committed, they're intelligent, they're very, very insightful, and they will protect their interests by using lawyers as opposed to other means. And we will be there for them, next to them, while they are going to school to ensure their safety, security, and continued involvement on community and campus life.
Okay, so it's 180 days. Do the math. It's 6 months
Or less,
or
or
less.
more. If, for example, that there is going to be some form of settlement, we will examine it as all lawyers do.
How are students going to be protected up until your letter and your application actually gets heard?
The fact that people today in our society use violence and aggression in order to convey messages of political belief is wholly unacceptable. That is based on the fact that currently today in Canada, there's a lack of leadership. And when there's a lack of leadership, haters fill the void with whatever they feel is appropriate. These students and any other good citizen, regardless of their religion or race or any other preconceived notion, has a right to express themselves about their political belief. This is not about political belief. This is about not using violence and hatred. There is no protection for hate speech. There is no protection for violence, for assembly of violence and intimidation. If violence is used, the police are there in order to ensure that people are protected. You know that I've written to Mayor Plant on several occasions. I've implored her to bring safety, security, and stability back to the island of Montreal. Her response is always muted. She fails to take into consideration the current state of affairs in Montreal. That you would have to be blind to see that Montreal has fallen into a decrepit state. The world is not flat. There is snow in the Arctic, and we have tons of potholes. And anybody who tells you otherwise is not being truthful with you. The same verbiage is coming from City Hall. Everything is fine. There are no problems. It's freedom of expression. Today, like every other day, we will fight. We will stand tall. We will make our positions known. Jews, non-Jews, everybody has an interest in ensuring that there's safety and security in their communities.
Thank you. The masking request that you put in, I just want to finish on that. Why put that in?
Well, first of all, it's their own policy. They have a specific policy regarding covering your face while on campus. So, what we sought in our injunctive relief conclusions is that they enforce their policies. There is no doubt that if you cover your face while on campus for the purposes of concealing your identity in order to A, commit a policy infraction, B, even potentially commit a criminal act such as aggression or violence or assault, is unacceptable. The whole point of this lawsuit, which these students have stood up for, is Concordia, you have rules, you have regulations. Don't create more regulations that you won't follow or enforce. Enforce those that you have. That would be a great start. And in fact, that's exactly what this lawsuit seeks. We cannot allow the future of our community to be intimidated, segregated, subjugated, and more importantly, intimidated to the point where they become demoralized in them attending school and becoming the future leaders of tomorrow. They wish that these students would crawl up under a desk and hide. It's not going to happen. They are proud students. They are vocal in their positions. They have the protection of the law. And more importantly, they have the protection of being public because now that they are public, they cannot be earmarked for intimidation. They cannot be earmarked for aggression because they will be known, they will be seen, and they will be protected by the community at large, and more importantly, the legal system that is meant to protect litigants.
You say that no one can harass them, but now that their names are on, they're going to be doxxed and worse.
Well, you see now I think you understand that if this was a normal situation and people were expressing themselves normally, they wouldn't be harassing people. And there you go. Now you understood why this lawsuit is ever so necessary. Because in a normal society with normal rules where people respect each other and they're civil and there's still room for discourse, you don't do stuff like that. But because the people who are targeting these students and other students do not follow social policy, do not follow the law, do not act in a civilized fashion, this is why Concordia has the utmost of responsibility to protect those students. But they will be targeted, and they shouldn't be targeted. And the fact that they are on campus demonstrates even more why the conclusions sought are needed and required under the circumstances.
I want to say thank you for being on the CJN Daily.
Thank you very much for having us.
From Montreal to Ontario, the situation for Jewish university students and faculty on campus this year will be front and center of our CJN coverage. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the journalist we just hired to cover this important story, Mitchell Konski. He's come to us from CTV. He's also an author, a screenwriter, and a decade ago he faced his own first anti-Semitic experience as an undergraduate at Laurier University in Waterloo. Mitchell Konski joins us to tell us what he's learned while covering this year's Back to School and why it looks and feels already different for Jewish students in a good way. So welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're probably the only such reporter in the whole country devoted specifically to this topic, I'm imagining, right?
You know, it's definitely, it's a big beat, so I'm excited to dive in.
What stories are you going to be covering and what have you covered already?
Last year we saw a tremendous surge of encampments throughout North America. A lot of those encampments were dismantled this summer following the Ontario court ruling that caused a lot of these encampments to be dismantled. But, you know, there is still a lot of protesters. There's a lot of animosity on campus. There's a lot of hostility. And there's just been this drastic rise of anti-Jewish, anti-Israel sentiment that a lot of students are being confronted with and learning to grapple with. And administrations are figuring out ways to deal with this. Jewish organizations are amping up security. And Jewish students are coming into this new school year with a different level of determination and obviously a little bit of grief and anxiety as well.
What I hear you saying is last year, nobody was prepared for this on campus. And this year, there seems to be much more resources being devoted. Can you walk us through what you've discovered in your reporting about who's doing the I guess, standing for the Jewish students?
The unfortunate reality is that the people that are standing for the Jewish students more than anyone are the Jewish students. And there's Jewish organizations that are doing everything they possibly can. Hillel Ontario is amping up their staffing. They're going to be hiring more advocacy professionals throughout campuses in Ontario. API International, they're promoting anti-Semitism education workshops. They also have something that they partnered with the Anti-Defamation League called the Anti-Semitism Response Center. And this is essentially this one-stop shop where Jewish students throughout North America are able to track incidents of anti-Semitism, but it's also a place where they can gain legal resources or emotional support or anything that can really help them navigate this rough water that, as you said, a lot of students were really unprepared for last year.
What is API, just for people who don't know what that is?
So API is, I was actually a former brother of this, so I'll say that, but API is the Jewish fraternity. It's actually one of the biggest Jewish fraternities in the world. They have chapters Canada, US, UK, Israel, and it's a fraternity that focuses on philanthropy, Jewish identity, Jewish culture, and making a good impact in the Jewish community.
What has the university's been promising to do?
So last week, the president of McGill University, Deep Saini, had a virtual town hall meeting with the Montreal MP, Anthony Housefather. He's the special advisor to the Prime Minister and Cabinet on Canada's Jewish community and anti-Semitism. And they spoke about ways in which they can prepare for protesters and a lot of the animosity on campus. A lot of that comes down to collaboration with the police, figuring out ways to preemptively respond before the situation gets too heated and too intense. The president of McGill, he did mention that one of the biggest obstacles they face is a matter of identification. It's difficult to enforce rules when offenders can't be identified because their faces are being covered. And so there's, certain legislation adjustments that are being considered on campus. I know Anthony Housefather, he recommended something called bubble legislation, which essentially allows certain rules to be enforced within the premise of a university campus or within certain geographies that might be necessary to keep certain communities safe. And these are conversations that are being had. They're also discussing ways to include Jewish students in equity, diversity, and inclusion conversations, and figure out ways to make sure that Jews aren't left behind as universities do grapple with, this rising tide of anti-Semitism.
What did the President of McGill say, though? They had the longest encampment of anybody. They were the first in Canada, and it was horribly anti-Semitic, and it was really got out of hand, and then finally got shut down only after, I think, probably one of the last ones.
He said, and I quoted him in the first story that I wrote, that he said that he has never experienced anything of this nature before. And it wasn't just the intensity of these protests, it was the abruptness of this. He said he's not actually sure if anti-Semitism has gone up or if the events of October 7th has just allowed people an excuse to express pre-existing anti-Semitism. This was unlike anything he's seen. As you said, there was an effigy that was hung on one of the university buildings of Benjamin Netanyahu. There was swastikas. There was chants to globalize the Intifada. And it really did get out of control very quickly. The storm has alleviated a little bit, but he is fully expecting those protesters to return. And, as we approach 1 year of October 7th, since October 7th, Jewish students, Jewish faculty, they're going to want to commemorate a lot of the victims that we've lost, especially given the recent news of the 6 hostages that were murdered. They're going to be up against some opposing forces, and university administrations are figuring out ways to deal with that. I know Jewish organizations are all planning ways to amp up security. I can't really give too much detail about the specifics about that, but I know it's a consideration that they're all grappling with. And as we move into the new school year, these administrations are going to figure out ways that they can keep students as safe as possible despite what they're up against.
Okay, but then some of these campuses caved, and I'm going to use that word in quotation marks because not everybody agrees with that word. University of Windsor, for example, University of Ontario, or Ontario Tech in Oshawa, agreed to have the encampments come down, but they, gave a lot of and they answered the protests requests for more funding to bring Palestinian scholars to Canada to help Palestinian students that are feeling mental anxiety. But of course, they didn't do the same for the Jewish students. And so when you're going back to a school which has clearly put its cards on the table that you are not welcome, how do students in those kinds of situations, what are they getting in terms of assistance? Are you able to shed light on that?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Hillel Ontario is promoting a campaign to get a lot of students in university governments and trying to gain as much credibility within the student infrastructure as they possibly can. And it's going to be a little battle of these micro steps of figuring out ways to allow the student body to speak for themselves. The administration can ultimately only do so much. Sometimes it really does come down to the students. And I know whether it's Hillel Ontario or API or any of these other Jewish organizations, Chabad, a lot of it seems to be about just speaking loud and proud about their Jewish identity and using that pride as a source of combat.
And in terms of what it's like in the actual classroom, how to police what the professor's allowed to do or say, what are the concerns that you're hearing?
So there's a term called abuse of podium, which is when university professors take class time to make political statements, in this case specifically about Israel, that can further demonize the Israel state or demonize Zionists. And I know that the president of McGill, he explicitly mentioned that no university faculty will be permitted to abuse the podium in any such way. Other universities seem to be following suit. The problem is, of course, that there's a lot of classrooms, there's a lot of professors, and it really does come down to students keeping their ears on the ground and reporting any incidents of abuse of podium. And that's the extent the administrations of these universities can respond accordingly. But if they don't know, same as the difficulties of identification on protests, if they don't know the offender, they don't know what's happening, it's difficult to respond to. So
and that's a more tricky thing for a student, is to rat on your prof where you need the marks too. What are your stories to come that we should be following where this goes?
I'm going to be speaking to different administrations to see how they're going to be handling security measures for October 7th, what's going to be allowed, what isn't going to be allowed, and how they're going to enforce specific hate speech policy. You might have heard that NYU recently amended their hate speech policy to specifically prevent the word Zionist from being used as a cheat code to further demonize and promote hate and discriminate against Jewish students. I'm standing by to see what Canadian universities are going to follow suit and also amend their hate speech policy to prevent that from happening on Canadian soil. There's some makeshift security initiatives of people that are coming together, of Jewish organizations that are coming together to protect their fellow Jews on campus.
Sort of community volunteers, and that's something we saw. They went down to U of T or something during orientation to be there to.
Exactly, they got the muscle we need. We're looking for all the help we can get, but I also just want to say that I've spoken to some students at this point, and as much as there is some anxiety and some grief, there's a lot of steadfast determination and optimism as well. And it's not just a doom and gloom situation where these students are coming in horrified to go to their school library or attend their lectures. There's a lot of pride right now.
Now they got mad and they got organized and they got trained over the summer. There were, anti-Semitism training courses offered by, for example, our synagogue had one where they had the experts come and say, all right, this is what you're going to face. This is how you fight it. And that I haven't seen before. And I'm sure you're hearing about that as well, right?
Right. Yes.
Are you still at school, by the way? Are you still doing your master's or you're done?
I just finished another master's. Yeah. I did a master's in screenwriting. So after journalism at TMU.
How did anti-Semitism on campus impact you there day to day?
There'd be times where you would walk by students simultaneously denouncing genocide and calling for it. It would be those typical chants of brick by brick, Israel must fall. And all the typical chants that we've all grown weary of and that we've all heard in multiple corners of this city and multiple corners of Canada. There's been signs, there's been, demonizing ideology that is definitely filtered not just into the student body, but definitely within faculty as well. And I've witnessed that firsthand.
So thanks a million for being on the CJN Daily, and we can't wait to see the rest of the coverage. Good luck. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. If you have stories or news tips about campus life, you can send them to me or to Mitch at info@thecjn.ca. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.